Phyllis. Welcome to the Scenic Route Podcast. How are you?
Well, I'm really good, and I'm so happy to be here with you, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It's really close to my sociologist heart, this conversation today. And
Right,
yeah, I've been thinking just with, I mean, it was just the first presidential debate was just a few days ago.
right,
Um, and I read someone on social media saying, "Oh, I'm not following that. Like, I'm kind of like not following what's going on in the world. Like, it's too distressing." And I was like, on one hand, that's a lot of privilege if you can exclude yourself from what's going on in the world. Um,
mhm,
and at the same time, I get that a lot of things that are going on right now are too overwhelming. And yet, I don't want to close myself off from what's going on in the news, what's going on in the world. Like, I want to know how shit the situation is in Sudan or in Gaza or what's going on in the US. Like, everything, we cannot exclude ourselves from society. We're part of it, we're part of the systems.
right.
And yet, I thought myself, okay, how, like, what's your stand on this? Do you like follow, like, you're like follow or like follow with like precautions, which is always like follow with precautions, yes.
Right.
Or,
Yeah, well, I'm a psychotherapist, and I come from the world of understanding how we are impacted by our family systems and how we each as individual impact our family
mm,
systems. And that happens on all different levels, whether it's your family of origin, your school, your business, your place of worship, your community, your state, your government, or your place in the world. They're all family systems.
mm,
And the one of the underlying gifts of the family systems work that psychology now really embraces is that we're conditioned by what's happening around us. It
mm,
affects us for better or for worse. And sometimes it's for better. If you're living in a supportive, encouraging, safe community that respects you and that wants to provide for your basic needs, great.
mm,
Um, and there's millions of people who don't have that. And there's people, many, many, many people here in the United States who don't have that from the
mm,
largest institutions that we're subject to. So for me, I feel like whether we want to know or not, we're impacted by it.
mhm,
And so for myself, I'm sort of like you. I feel like I need to know
mm,
some. I need to know what's happening around me, what will impact me, what has impacted me, and for the sake of how can I be the best participant in
mhm.
that?
Yes.
And that's really a big part of it. So for people who really don't want to know anything, either they've just found their niche about how they're going to participate and they're focused on that, and that's okay for them, or they're really afraid to know, and not really recognizing that they're being impacted by their wall, of
Mhm,
walling something out, and knowing that there's something on the other side that they're afraid to really let into their consciousness is still an impact, because then some of our energy is going into a defense. I'm defending against knowing, because it feels overwhelming to me. And while I have great empathy for that, because some of what's going on in the world is really overwhelming for most people, what I have found psychologically is that feeling powerless is not a good way for anyone to feel. We're not wired to feel at a complete loss to
mm,
help our environment or the people around us or ourselves. And so for me, the best antidote to feeling powerless, and there's a level on which we are powerless. I cannot change all the laws in my country. I can't change the Supreme Court's decisions, So there's things that I'm truly powerless over. And I think the antidote to that is to find where you do have power.
mm. Where you
Could
can
you
have
impact?
influence, where you can shape an
Exactly.
outcome. Mm,
Exactly. So it might be with the people just in your immediate circle. It might be with your children. It might be that you could bring more kindness, more compassion, more understanding, more patience and tolerance to your workplace. It could be that you want to write a meaningful letter to the editor, or call your senator, or call people, in positions of authority. It could be that you want to go demonstrate peacefully somewhere or run for office. But whatever it is, whether you think your sphere of influence could be what we consider small, but it's not if you're helping the people around you,
Mm.
or large in terms of impacting a large number of people, find where you have appropriate power, because I think that actually infuses a life force and a sense of meaning and purpose, and involvement in an appropriate way in what's going on, rather than either railing against it or feeling
Mhm.
powerless to change it.
That is such a good point and really a powerful reframe. And I see, for example, voting as one of those aspects that you,
Right,
as a public, as a civilian, that you have the right to vote. And
right.
yet, I know from my family, sadly, there are a lot of folks in my family who don't vote because, oh, it doesn't matter. Like the whole kind of like thing that goes on. And
Hmm.
whereas like with voting, I can't relate really, but with other things I do, right? For example, what does it matter if I eat less meat if we still have big oil companies polluting the planet? Like I get the sense of like
Right.
almost hopelessness of the micro scale I can operate. So how can we come at that? How can we reframe this?
Well, one of the things that, because I use the family model, what's a healthy family and what's a dysfunctional or abusive family, and
Hmm.
how do we look at our larger systems through that lens?
Uh-huh.
And often what happens in a family where one person or two people, but usually it's one person, one adult in a family, wields all the power in a dysfunctional family. Other people don't
Mm.
have a voice, or if they try to have a voice, they're harmed, or they're silenced, or they're humiliated, or they're
Man, that is so true for our family. Phyllis, shut up. Okay, that's why my brother is not voting. Now it makes sense.
Right. And so in a dysfunctional family, the people in power want to keep that power. That's
Mm.
how they get to do what they
Yeah.
do, take what they want, and manage and, control other people for their own ends,
Mm.
for their ideals, their own righteousness, their own rapacious kind of desires. So we have to remember that if you're in a system where the people in power really want to hold on to that power and don't want you to have a significant voice, whether it's as a voter or, in any other, corporation or in a business that you work in, um, that's part of the system. And you're
Mm.
actually complying with, okay, you have all the power and I have none, so I opt out. But that's actually what that system wants from you. So
So
we're actually
it's operating as designed and you're following suit.
exactly. And it takes, sometimes it takes courage, and sometimes it's a risk to actually stand up and say, no, I don't agree, or no, I don't want that, and I'm going to advocate for something different. And you might not like me, and you might attack me, or you might malign me, or you might ostracize me, but I have a right to stand up for what I believe in and what I believe is really helpful and peaceful and, generative
Yeah.
for myself and other people. So we have to, looking through that family system lens really helps us understand what some of those forces are around us. Of course people feel hopeless, and of course people feel helpless, because that's part of the design of a more authoritarian structure, or
Hmm.
of people who want to hold on to power and don't
Hmm.
want to give you any say or share power with you, which is actually a healthier model for human relations.
Mm. Yeah, it's really helpful to see kind of like the way you tend to feel when you engage with the news and the world at large, the sense of like hopelessness or despair, that there's nothing wrong with you. It's actually just the outcome that was desired.
Right. And it's a very difficult feeling to have, like I
Mm,
said. And that's why it's so important to find your voice, find the place where your passion has a meaning and purpose, even if you think it's just for your own welfare or for the people around you. Whatever we each do to heal our own wounds and become a more constructive member of the relationships we're in, if it's one relationship or 1,000 relationships or a
mm,
million relationships, we are a contribution to the
mm.
world at large. And I
Yeah.
think, the average person doesn't necessarily feel that. And so, like when you're saying, people say, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't matter anyway. Wow, you're really complying with the powers that be.
Mm-hmm.
And your vote actually really does matter.
100%. I, for someone who has never maybe thought about the concept of how our family lens or how our home environment shape our perception and behaviors in and off the public sphere. Could you give us, from your experience, other examples of the ways in what ways our family systems or home environments actually do shape our perceptions and behaviors?
Right. Well, as children, we're very porous, and
Mm-hmm.
our parents generally, for most children, are the main influence. There's
Yeah.
school and there's community and there's friends, but our parents are who we come home to. Our parents are who most often are our role models for how men treat women, how women treat men, how parents treat children. What are the expectations? What's considered success? What's considered failure, what's considered right, what's considered wrong, what are the consequences if you do something that is considered wrong, what are the rewards
Mm-hmm.
for doing what is considered right, what are the role models for conflict resolution. And that's really one of the keys. Do the parents fight it out and somebody wins, or somebody is silenced, or somebody is shamed into compliance? Are the children terrified to express a need because they're afraid they're going to be hit or they're going to be shamed? Or is there open communication? Is there a feeling of love and acceptance for the differences that people
Mm-hmm.
have? One kid's a great math student, the other one is really wonderful at music. Are there different expectations for different individuals?
Mm-hmm.
Do we make adaptations for that, or does everybody have to become a doctor?
Yeah, at
Or
the same pace, especially, right?
right.
Like, mm,
Right. So we learn all these things. We learn values, we learn coping
mm-hmm.
strategies, we learn role models for conflict resolution, we learn gender role models. We learn all this in our family of origin, and we just suck it up as children. I mean, for most children, unless they're really exposed to something very different from what happens in their family, that's just the way life is. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
So if people fought it out and screamed at
I
each
mean, your
other,
world is very small when you're a kid, so your family is your world. So
right?
from there, you
And
think,
you
oh,
would,
everyone is like that.
that's right. And you're dependent on them. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to find a way to adapt. So if you have a healthy family that basically treats each other with kindness and tries to resolve conflict to everybody's somehow satisfaction, even if it's bumpy and imperfect, even if you have a fight, but then people really try to work it out and come back
Mm-hmm.
together and feel loving and resolved with one another,
And
great.
forgiving and
Totally,
mm,
totally. Or you see your parents making amends, like a parent that would come and say, I'm sorry I yelled at you. I was really
mm-hmm.
upset with
Yeah.
what you did, but I shouldn't have yelled at you. Let's talk about it now. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
That's an incredible role model, that you have an adult that takes responsibility for their behavior and can
Yeah.
make amends without shaming you or shaming themselves. And so we learn these things in our family. And if you grow up in a family where people just scream and yell and call each other names and slam doors and walk out and
Or
don't
just be
come,
silent, which is almost as worse or even worse.
totally icing each other out, then chances are that's how you might respond to conflict later in your life.
Mm,
And then if you're a person who runs for office, and that's your conflict resolution model, that's what you bring to this world stage or the
mm-hmm.
local stage or the national stage. And so that's why I say that our mental health really redefining and looking at what are healthy family dynamics and how can we bring them to our larger organizations and institutions is the missing piece in our politics today. What
Mm-hmm.
if we had leaders who were committed to sitting down and talking respectfully to one another, doing their best to be open to an opposing point of view, being committed to actually working it out for the good of the family of their country?
Yeah.
Because when parents are unendingly divisive and fighting and verbally or emotionally or physically violent with each other, their children suffer. And when leaders in large organizations and institutions are role modeling those same dysfunctional
Mm-hmm.
dynamics of overpowering each other, and it's a win-lose model, and I'm going to win and you're going to lose,
Yeah.
everybody suffers. And we're really suffering here in the United States, and some people much more than others.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really a global suffering because we
Yeah,
have
I do
very
too.
similar situations in a lot of
Right.
countries. Um, yeah, it's really how this really shapes us in even in ways that most of us are not conscious of
That's right.
to
And
how
that's
to
why I
start
wrote my book.
entangling this.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, it's something that only comes to light when you really start to do the work and you're really looking at things and like why am I behaving so like it really requires a level of reflection.
that's right.
So how can anyone who is kind of like more at the beginning of this kind of work, how can what's a good entry point for them to start? Because I know from my experience, unraveling, especially family stuff, is really rough and tends to be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like from your experience and expertise, is there, I don't know, I don't want to say an easy way in because there's probably no such thing, but how can we start to be more mindful of, oh, actually, this, I might react this way because of the environment I grew up in?
Right. Well, I think you used a really important word, and that is self-reflection. I
Mm,
think most of us have grown up in an environment, and I know that here in the United States, the environment is still very much like this, not for all people, but still very much like this, which is we tend to look at who to blame for our
mm,
problems. And it's a very finger pointing,
mm.
that group is responsible for these economic ills. And um, you
This
know,
administration is to blame for
right,
XYZ. Mm.
right. Or that ethnic group is the cause of all our problems, or that
Yeah,
religious group, or that
yeah. I
gender.
mean, we have that too in Europe as well. Like we love to blame certain ethnic
Right,
groups for whatever. Yeah.
right. And so the key really to resolving our human relations is taking responsibility for yourself. Who am
Mm.
I in this interaction? Am I yelling back at you? Am I rolling my eyes when you talk? Do I threaten to leave? Do I slam the door? Do I call you names? Am I passive aggressive? Do I just look at my phone while you're talking instead of really paying attention
Mm-hmm.
to you the way I want you to pay attention to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually, when I was in graduate school, I had a teacher who was teaching a class in couples therapy, and I never forgot one of the things he said, and then it became a cornerstone of some of what I have developed myself in terms of what are the healing principles. But the thing he said was that the couples that he worked with that did the best
Mm-hmm.
and had the best outcome for their relationship and were able to really come back together in a healthy, loving way.
Mm-hmm.
The people who stopped pointing their finger at the other person and focused on their own responsibility
Yeah.
for changing the relationship into what they wanted it to be.
Mm.
And I think that's the key. Whether you go to therapy and you really work on some of the wounds that you have that had you act out or act in or be intolerant or be impatient or be blaming, or be outer directed in terms of blaming other people, and you heal some of those wounds, and that makes you better able to be more responsible for yourself. Or if you just take it on Who do I really want to be? And what I think the underlying key to that, to shifting those gears is, am I going to talk to you the way I want you to talk to me?
Yeah.
Am I
To
going to
approach it with
look
a certain reciprocity of like, I would
right?
never want anyone to talk to me like this.
Right. So why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Um, am I listening to you on a deep level with some kind of openness, some kind of patience, some kind of tolerance, some kind of compassion, the way I want you to hear me? And
Mm-hmm.
I think these are those two things, speaking the way we want to be spoken to and
Mm-hmm.
listening the way we want to be heard, are two of the most difficult skills to develop when you're, especially when you're triggered, when you're
Yeah.
really angry, when you're really hurt, when you're really frightened, and when you think you're really right and the other person
Yeah.
is
That's
really
when you
wrong.
got to do the work. Like when
That's
you
right.
really, and I mean, I know this because I know from like, for me, the instances this shows up the most is I really disdain how a lot of people talk to their kids.
Right.
Um, and a lot of things we would be talking about, oh, is this okay or not? We would not be having if we would take this tiny human as a full grown ass human. Um, and it's really hard if you're like triggered, if your kid is triggering you or in the midst and you would just like retort to your default mechanism of like yelling, to
Totally.
be really like, no, actually, I would not like to be yelled at, so I'm not gonna yell at my kid.
Hmm.
That's when I work, and it's really fucking hard.
It's it's the hardest. And one of the things that I don't think we think about a lot is it's actually easier to fight. I'm just in reaction mode. I yell, I'm righteous. I want you to hear me. I don't want to hear you. I'm going to kind of,
I want to
pummel you.
vent. I want to get my anger, my air out. It's about me
Right. It's
releasing.
actually easier. It's just automatic reactive mode, really reining myself in and reflecting on who I'm
Mm,
being and trying to be the person that I want you to be for me is much harder. And it's much more worth it because it's the key element to actually coming back together and resolving our differences. And one of the things that I've just become so aware of the more and more I've talked about this is that we have to graduate from the win-lose paradigm,
mm,
and we're
yeah.
still running on it. If one person wins and the other person loses, what happens to the person who loses?
Mm,
Because they're angry, they're unheard, they're unsatisfied, they feel alienated, and their issues not having been heard or not having been respected or not having been given a place at the table only inflames their reactivity and their defense mode more. And I think we really have this not only in homes, but we have this on a national and international level, that we really repress people.
mm-hmm,
We silence them. We don't want to hear what their real legitimate complaints are and meet their legitimate needs. We silence them for our own power and acquisition, and our own, righteousness and all the reasons that people overpower each other. And we create victims, just like an abusive parent who doesn't want to hear anything from anybody else and wants to rule the roost according to their own needs and desires,
mm,
creates victims in their family who become symptomatic. And we have so many symptomatic people in this world. And many of them are picking up weapons. They're angry. They don't feel like they have any power, so they turn to violence. And many of them,
mm,
as
mm-hmm,
you mentioned in the beginning, feel really hopeless and really powerless, and then they're easily dominated. So if
mm,
you have people who are invested in being the aggressor and the dominator, and people who are easily dominated, you have the recipe for a very unsafe, undemocratic, unhealthy
yeah.
um, environment on a
Yeah.
large scale. And that's what we have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've seen this in so many countries where you have this, I mean, especially also in the Middle East, right? Where you have this vacuum of power and you have like economic hopelessness, everything
Right.
is in shambles, and then you have someone promising the hopeless people something they want to hear, And it's a we
Exactly.
know we know from sociology and social psychology, this is the number one way to radicalize people.
That's right. That's
Mm,
right. You take people who are deprived, who don't feel like their lives have any particular meaning, who don't have opportunity, who
mm,
don't feel seen, who don't feel like they have personal power, and you get them to belong to your power-hungry organization, and and they finally feel a sense of belonging because we're starving for a sense of meaningful, safe, valuing belonging. But if we don't get it, and you see this on a schoolyard, a little kid who doesn't feel loved or doesn't feel like they're included, they can be inscripted to support a bully on the playground, or they might be the target of a bully, one
mm,
or the other. But we want to belong. It's
mm.
we're born with that. We're born wired for love and belonging. And when we don't get it, we become symptomatic.
Yeah.
And we do that as children, and we do that as adults.
Mm-hmm. 100%. But I feel, yes, belonging, but the step before belonging is connection,
That's
right?
right.
We need to be able to connect with people again. And this is the funny paradox, right? We're as connected as probably never before through technology. And at the same time, we're drifting so much further apart from each other. What How can we establish this connection that the connection points to connect again with people, to then be able to build trust and create this safe belonging.
Well, I think many people have lots of feelings about technology, and I think that we should be thinking about it and what the effects of technology are. And in some ways, it does connect us. I can talk to somebody on WhatsApp on the other
Yeah,
side of
I
the
mean, we
world.
wouldn't have met, we wouldn't have had this conversation, right? I mean,
Right,
it has
right.
great aspects for sure.
It has wonderful opportunities for connection,
Mhm.
but a lot of social media, and what's on sort of the news feeds on technology are not real connection. They're
Mm,
very, very superficial. They're very image oriented. They're a substitute for real human connection. And I
mm,
think there is no substitute for real human connection, for being with people, for belonging, whether it's to one
yeah.
person or a group of people or a community, for feeling that you are seen, that you're valued, that you have a place, and that you matter. And I don't think we can get that just from social media. So I think,
Mhm.
unfortunately, because people are so mobile, and they move around a lot, and a lot of people don't live anywhere near their families if they want to. Um, and that a lot of people really don't have the skills to reignite a sense of community and belonging around them, and they're more subject to just being influenced by whatever comes their way across social media, because that's where they're looking for connection. So
Mm,
I think we have to bring the focus back to our actual human relationships with other people, because it's harder. On social media, you can put out whatever you want, and you can
yeah.
hide anything that you don't want to expose. But in a real relationship with another human being, we're our whole selves. And if we want healthy relationships, we have to learn how to create them and work them out when they're in trouble.
Yeah, which again is really hard for us because most of us have not been modeled this as kids. What
Right,
makes a safe
right.
relationship? And I mean, we could go down a whole different alley of like media literacy and the influence of mass communication and how we could just. But yeah, I want to go circle back to something that I feel is even more important. And you phrased this beautifully of that we kind of like have to graduate from the win-lose paradigm, and I even go further. We have to absolutely dismantle it. This whole black and whiteness. Like,
Right.
what what steps? How can we contribute on a personal and on a public level to that dismantling of the like that the
Mhm.
win lose?
Well,
dichotomy.
I mean, there's many things, but one big thing is to understand what's at stake if we don't dismantle
Mm,
it. The win-lose paradigm is what creates war.
mm,
And we have weapons that could destroy life as we know it. And we're still building them and we're still funding the possibility of their use. And many countries still threaten their use. So I think we have to really understand what's at stake, which is the ultimate viability not only of ourselves, but of this species and maybe a lot of life on Earth. And I would hope that could be more and more of a wake-up call. I don't know if it is all the time, but, it's just like if we don't work it out in our families and in our communities, we have more gun violence, we have more racial hatred, we have more discrimination, we have more, small segments of the very wealthy and larger populations of
yeah.
people who are poor and are not making it. So I
The
think we have
divide is growing and on
the
all
divide.
accounts.
So we have to look at that and actually feel the pain of it. And that's one of the things that's so beautiful about the world of therapy and psychology is that you get to feel the pain of the dysfunction that you have suffered and the dysfunction that you might have created yourself without judgment, without blame, without retaliation, without punishment, but with a desire to heal it, desire to do it differently. So I think
Mm,
we have to know what's at stake. I think we have to be willing to feel the pain that we have collectively created, whether you and I have done it or somebody else did more or we did more or whatever, and lift up the lens of blame and look for healing.
mm,
How do we come back together? So the big thing is to actually feel the impact of where we are. And, people don't come to therapy unless they're feeling the impact of where they are that doesn't work. That's what brings them. They're at war with themselves, or they're at war with their partners, or their children, or their boss, and they want to get out of it. But somehow, as a collective, we haven't embraced that. We're still invested in war, which is insanity from a psychological point of
mhm,
view. It's premeditated murder from a
mm,
psychological point of view, from a human point of view.
yeah.
So I think that's the beginning, is to really realize and take in the consequences of what's going to happen if we continue the way we are.
Mm,
And then I think it comes back to healing our own wounds and committing to, and this is a big one for me, I think we have to commit to nonviolence, nonviolent communication, and nonviolent conflict resolution,
mm,
because that's the beginning of safety. So, how do I do that? I commit in myself, and none of us do this perfectly. I'm not saying this isn't trial and error, it is, but committing to restraining my most dysfunctional behaviors. I'm
mm,
not going to yell at you. I will try not to roll my eyes when you're
yeah.
talking. I will listen to you. I will do my very best to listen to you, even when I totally disagree and I think you're being a jerk.
Mhm,
Like, because that's the restraint. We need restraint.
mhm,
Because what we're doing now is I was violent. I yelled at you. I called you names. I withheld resources from you because you deserved it. So
mhm.
we justify the way we treat people badly. Well, you're wrong.
We're
So I
always
have
good at justifying our behaviors.
right. And those are dysfunctional family dynamics.
Mm,
If one person is always right and everybody else is always wrong, there's no room for everybody else.
mm,
And they think they're just as right as the person who's saying they're right. We all think we're right. We all think we're right. So it's not the goal has to be not to decide who's right, but to learn how to listen so that we actually can get underneath our defenses
mm,
and feel our joint humanity, our collective humanity. I bring this up all the time. There's an organization in America that's a grassroots organization called the Braver Angels, and they bring people from opposing parties together. And obviously, it's people who are willing to have these conversations. Nobody's forced
yeah.
into these conversations, but they bring people from opposing positions and opposing parties together to just hear each other. And I don't know exactly how they facilitate those
Mhm,
meetings, but they facilitate deep listening. And
yeah.
what they inevitably find is that we're not all that different. What we want is not all that different, but we've been sort of categorized into these opposing parties and conditioned to believe that we have to fight one another than actually sit down with each other as human beings. There's nobody, I don't think, in any party in the United States, for instance, who wants their home to be bombed or their children to be kidnapped or to have no
Mm-hmm.
access to education or
Mm-hmm.
health care or food. There's nobody of any party who wants these things. These are all basic human needs. And I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want to belong to something that's worthwhile or to feel like they matter or have a voice. And so, how can we meet on that level playing field and then listen to our differences and actually try to work them out?
But how can we do that if the meaning, the values of the opposite party go against your livelihood?
Well, I think it speaks to a larger issue
Mm,
because we're living in a domination submission kind
mm,
of culture. And that's the win-lose paradigm. Somebody
mm-hmm,
wins, somebody loses, somebody
mm-hmm,
dominates, and somebody has to submit. And that whole paradigm has to shift. So
mm.
if you live in with values that I really don't agree with, and I don't want to live by myself, I may not be able to change your mind, but I don't want you to impose that on me. And if
Exactly. But that's what's currently happening.
right,
I'm saying, okay, I don't know, I'm against the abortion. That's a common example. So I'm just gonna prohibit everyone getting an abortion because it's my religion. And it's like, well, no one, then if it's your religion, then you're free to not have an abortion, but you cannot oppose this on anyone else.
right.
Mm.
Right, and I think we just have to keep advocating for that,
Yeah.
that that we, I mean, and again, this is like constant negotiation. If you're in any kind of a relationship, and hopefully a fairly good one, but you know that even in a fairly good relationship, you are constantly negotiating what you can have, what the other person wants, what you're going to do together, what you're not going to
Yeah.
do, what you believe in, um, from the smallest thing of what we're going to have for dinner to how we're going to raise our children or, larger involvement in our community. What's that going to be? It's constant negotiation. And we have to have the tools to do that nonviolently.
Yeah.
So if one person believes in, one thing like abortion and another person doesn't believe in it, there is a way to work it out. I don't know what the whole answer is. It would be like when a couple comes in and I had this once where the wife really wanted to have children and the man really didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't have half a baby. There
Mm-hmm.
isn't a compromise in that.
Mm-hmm.
So either one person agrees, not forced, but
Mm-hmm.
agrees to the other person's desire in a case like that where it's black and white, and
Yeah.
certainly not issues are all black and white. Many can be compromised, but where it's really black and white, either one party agrees to go with the other, or you separate and you go your own ways
And live
peacefully.
your truth.
That's right. And we
Yeah.
don't know how to do that. We don't even know how to separate peacefully when we disagree.
Mm.
We attack each other, we malign each other,
Yeah,
we
bath
sometimes
mouth each other. Like,
right,
mm.
or we kill them. On the largest end of the spectrum, we
Oh
kill
yeah,
them.
100%. Mm.
Right. So I think, and these are all mental health issues because mentally healthy people don't just force their will on someone. And I don't mean that a parent can't make their kid go to bed, that has the authority to make their kid go to bed, but that we exercise authority to the best of our ability when it's appropriate to have authority, like an employer does have authority over their employee,
Yeah,
a
for
parent does
the
have
best.
authority.
Yeah, you have to you like invoke your authority for the best and with the best intentions for the greatest outcome of all,
Right. And
right?
again, no one's going to do it perfectly, but the
At
principle
least
behind
fucking
it
try.
is we do that trying not to harm the other person. So you're not going to throw your kid in their room. You might take them by the hand and say, you have to go to bed. And I'm sorry, you're upset. I know you don't want to go to bed, but if you won't stay in bed, then I'm going to sit here next to your bed until you realize that you can't get up, whatever. So we try to do it in the least injurious way,
The
respecting,
least harmful way.
right,
Mm,
respecting the worth, the value, and the rights of other people. And we just keep committing to do that, not saying I give up because you're a jerk.
mm.
But
Yeah.
these are very difficult things to do. And all I would say is we urgently need to learn how to do them for our own survival
Mm.
and for the welfare of our children and all future generations, because what we're doing now is not safe for
Yeah,
anyone.
we see the destruction on many, many levels already, and it's not gonna
Right.
get better. But I want to circle back because this is something I really struggle with on a personal level. And I'm curious to hear your take on your reframe on this. I'm sure you're gonna help me reframe it. The the whole question of there is no right or wrong. Like with abortion, yes, there might not be, but I see this, I don't know, there's something going on that I don't sometimes refer to as kind of like the demonization of science and knowledge of we where people treat their opinion as knowledge, as facts, as and this is just not the case. Like climate change is something, right? Where we know it's happening. We
Mm-hmm.
have scientific data that shows us it's getting warmer, we have more like emissions, all these things. And I personally do feel there is a right and wrong stance on this. Like if you're saying, oh, it's not happening, then okay, that could is your opinion, but like it's not a fact. Like I don't know. So there's like we're not going back to the Middle Ages where we
Right.
not believe science. I mean,
Right.
what else do we can we hold on to if we're like, science is a hoax? I'm
Well,
curious.
well,
What's yours take on
I think several things
it?
about that. I mean, and these are fabulous questions because I think we all have them and we don't know what to do with it, really. And it's not that I have all the answers. I just think that psychology has some big perspectives that need to be brought to bear.
Mm,
So, um, to a certain extent, when people say that it's just a hoax, for instance,
mm,
um, is that denial? That's a psychological condition. These
yeah.
places are being
Hmm.
flooded. Certain islands are now underwater or going underwater, or we have more hurricanes, or, the meteorologists can see that the whole wind cycles and whatever are changing. And that when the air heats up, that you have a different climate being created on land and in the air and in the sea, and they're all interconnected. So one of the things is that when people want to stay in power, they deny the evidence that would have them have to change their position or what they're
Hmm.
doing. So that's a
Hmm.
psychological issue. But I think on an even bigger level, that I think the best psychology and healing work of any kind, whether it's mediation or some other practice, is that we've lost the desire to actually sit down and hear many voices. So what if we had an assembly of people globally, the people who lived on those islands that
Yeah.
are being submerged, the people who have lost their lives of their loved ones and their homes and their communities from tornadoes that never used to strike their area
Hmm.
before, the scientists, the people who have economic interests, the people who create policy. What if we created a culture, because this is a healthy family culture
Mm.
where we listen to each other
Yeah,
and we
like like Haber, like the sociologist Habermas, Jürgen Habermas is defining it like this as the public sphere where like a society engages in critical public debate. Like you come
right,
together,
right.
respectfully engage, and you might think differently or you don't, but you come together and sort and talk through things, which is
Yeah,
currently not really happening.
because many people's voices are not even allowed to be heard,
Yeah, in the arena.
or the,
Mm,
or they're demeaned, or they're attacked. or they're silenced in even more repressive ways. Sometimes they're jailed or killed. And these are all mental health issues because mentally healthy people don't silence other voices. They learn to tolerate opposition or uncomfortable truths. Maybe I'm running a company, and what I'm doing and how I make my profit does something that is environmentally unsafe. Could I be willing to hear that? It would take a lot for me to be willing to factor that in, or am I just going to be a denier, or an ignorer, or strong arm my way into getting my way because I might lose some money? These are huge issues, but they're psychological issues, and we've made them ideological issues. And as long as they're ideological issues, we're going to fight. And when they're psychological issues, we could look for how do we restore ourselves to healthy human relationships.
So it's if we reframe ideological issues to psychological issues, it at least opens up a toolbox for us that we could use to work, like treat or ease these symptoms.
Right. Right. And again, it's going to be hard work when you have issues like abortion, where some people feel really strongly one way and people feel really strongly the other way. It's going to take a lot of dedication to work that out in a way that people can live with. And I think it has a lot to do with everything we're talking about. Are we going to stay in a win-lose, or how does everybody win in a situation like that? How does everybody win when some people are threatened by the idea of climate change and other people see the danger to the sustainability of life on Earth? How do we do that? We have to be able to sit down and talk to each other without threats, without violence, without name calling. That's the first step. And there is no other step. It's not going to get resolved any other way. We're just going to keep fighting.
And I feel you have to sit together, yes. And then, like, that's what we said before in the conversation, right? You have to facilitate moments where you can connect to create belonging community and establish safety and trust. And then another important thing is, like, sometimes you would get people to agree to like sit together, but it's kind of like you have to approach it with a kind of like different spirit and mind as well. If you come to the table and all you got is carrying a hammer,
that's right.
How do you expect to fix anything if all you got is a hammer?
Well, I think and I think we sort of touched on this, but I'll maybe make it a little stronger. And that is listening means not just like I'm tolerating listening to you while you say something that I disagree, and I can't wait till you're finished so I can tell you my point of view, which is what we usually do, right? It really means like what's underneath the anger, because usually underneath the anger of fierce opposition is some kind of pain, some kind of personal story,
a hurt,
like,
a wound.
right? And so, and some of the best mediation techniques start with helping people really become vulnerable about what's fueling their anger, which is generally some kind of pain, some kind of fear, some kind of loss, some kind of injury, some kind of wound to their sense of self, to their sense of belonging, to whatever happened to them that was hurtful. And when you can get people to actually hear where their rage is coming from, where their intense opposition is coming from, there's a door opening to feeling our shared humanity. And many people have experienced this in relationships. How many times have you maybe had a fight with your husband or your wife, and and you fought about it and you got really angry and somebody was upset and yelled and somebody cried, or you both yelled or whatever, and then
you threw stuff.
right. And then finally you talked about, my first husband was like that, and I'm really defensive around blah, blah, or I'm really on the lookout for that, or my mother was this way.
Give the other person a kind of like a way into understanding why you're reacting the way you react.
Right. And
Mm.
then you start to grow empathy. Oh, you never had a voice as a kid. I understand why you get so adamant to have your voice with me. But when you do that, the way you're doing it, I don't feel heard either. And I have the same wound or whatever it is, you know, but hearing each other's stories, allowing ourselves to go down into our vulnerability and our wounds, that's what the best therapy does in terms of healing on an individual level. And that's what the best therapy or mediation or other reconciling kinds of practices help people do when they're in high conflict. And then they
Mm.
can join around some sense of shared humanity and compassion. And then they're more willing to work it out. If I know you feel for my deepest pain, and you know that I feel for your deepest pain, we're much more willing to compromise or give our position up because it's not really that important or
Yeah.
whatever it
We see
is.
this in strong social movements, right? Because when you really have this sense of shared pain, it's really, really powerful.
It's really powerful,
Mm.
and it's what creates that kind of connection that you're talking
Yeah.
about that is essential. That's where we connect around our humanity. We don't connect around our narcissism and our egos and our power trips. That's alienating.
Yeah. That's a lot to sit with, for sure, right? Because you really you can start we came full circle, right? We said before, okay, how can we can be better citizens, better community members if we really look at our own shit and
Right.
really look at our wounds and address them and be reflective of them and ask us like, what do I really want to be? And then we can bring this to our family, to our community, and it kind of like grows from there.
And if we
Mm.
were really on a path of healing, we could commit to doing that as nations. What's our
Mm-hmm.
history? Where
Mm-hmm.
did we come from? Who settled here? What
Yeah.
traumas did they bring here? What's the pain that we have suffered?
Yeah. What's
Have
the
the groups
colonial
of
pain that is going
right.
on? Yeah.
And what pain have we inflicted? And could we be responsible for the ways as a nation we've hurt whole groups of people? And not like, oh my God, we're so horrible, but actually be responsible for that. We did things that hurt millions of people. Can we be responsible for that? Can we own it? Without making excuses, which is what we want in our own individual relationships, right? If somebody has really wronged us, we want them to just own it. And the best amends that anyone can make for something that they've done that has hurt another person or other people is to do it differently now. That's the best amends. So if I've been screaming at you or I've been icing you out when I'm angry, I can commit to not doing that anymore and
Mm.
sit down at the table and really talk to you. And, when we're talking on a national level, we're talking about people whose ancestors were killed, whose land was taken, who were enslaved. I mean, we're talking about big traumas
Yeah.
that probably many, many countries have inflicted on more vulnerable
We
populations.
have genocides in lots of different countries. Like there is a lot of national and international trauma that
Absolutely.
has happened. Yeah.
And these are signs of emotional growth and health when a person or a country can take responsibility for what they've done and not just talk about the hurt that they've endured. Of course, we have to talk about the hurts that we've endured. Of course we do. And we want reparations and we want justice and we want our voices to be respected and honored and valued. But we also have to be responsible for what we've done.
Mm.
And that's what's called a healthy ego. It's not ego like conceit. It's not ego like narcissism. It's like core inner strength that can really take responsibility on, and again,
Yeah.
we do
Seeing
this
that we
imperfect,
can be wrong, admitting that we were wrong, and
right?
committing to do better.
Right.
Mm. This is really powerful. And I really, yeah, I'm like, I really enjoy ending this conversation on this note, because it's so powerful to really be like, there's so much that we can do, even if it feels hopeless or even if you feel hopeless or powerless. And I think, yeah, thank you so much, Phyllis, for showing us a lot of reframes how we can approach this differently. And it's really, yeah, I know this is a conversation where I'll be logging off, and then I'll be like marinating and be like, oh yeah, this is actually so true. And
Right.
not just why my brother doesn't vote. Now I know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if people want to hear more from you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way to get in touch with me is through my website, which is my name, Phyllis Leavitt, Phyllis Leavitt, phyllisleavitt.com. You can contact me through my website. You can sign in for my newsletter. If you do that, you will get a free PDF that talks about the specific elements of how to repair conflict, how to be in conflict
Mm.
differently that you can apply to your own life and your own relationships. But I have many, many interviews on YouTube. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and, the main social media.
And you wrote a
And
book.
I wrote a book, and that if you really want the in-depth version of everything and the full version of everything we've talked about today and much more, it's in the book that you can see in the background. It's called America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. But it really applies worldwide. I think you can be in any country and relate to the interpersonal and psychological dynamics that I'm talking about and see their relevance. I just call it America in Therapy because this is the country that I'm familiar with and
Yeah.
that I can really speak to. But I know that the dynamics that I'm talking about and the principles of healing that I'm talking about apply everywhere. And I really talk about the diagnosis and the cure in this book. So it's like, how do we understand the roots of violence, the
Yeah.
roots of hatred, the roots of divisiveness, and what are the best tools that the world of psychology has to offer for healing on a collective level, which are the same tools that we use to heal on an individual level. You can also email me at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com. That's my business address.
Perfect. We will link everything in the show notes.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Phyllis, before I let you go, I always have one last question. What book are you currently reading, or what audiobook are you currently listening to?
Well, the book I'm currently reading happens to be a book that Kamala Harris wrote about her career, and
Mm,
she wrote it before she was ever tapped to be vice president. So she wrote it while she was a senator,
hmm.
and she just talks about it's a very illuminating book. I'm very happy that I read it because or reading it. I'm not quite done because she just talks about all the social justice issues that she's championed throughout her whole career, which makes me very happy. So that's the book I'm reading.
Perfect. Because I'm always asking, because smart people read smart books, and all the books go on the Scenic Route Podcast book club webpage. So
Oh, okay.
whenever you're not sure what book to read next, go on the Scenic Route Podcast.com and have a look. We have fiction, nonfiction, biographies, all really good, juicy bits, juicy books. Um, so yours gotta go up there as well.
Please, I would love it. Please feel free to read my book, comment, ask me questions. I'm happy to engage with anybody. I just feel passionate about contributing to a healing conversation for the good of all of us and all future generations.
Yeah, this passion clearly came through. Thank you so much for this conversation, Phyllis.
Thank you.